So I've got to say, this is shaping up to be one of the best World Championship matches in a long time, because we've seen more decisive games in the first 5 games than we did in like the last 5+ World Championship matches. So this is the Game 5 recap, and we truly saw one of the greatest attacks in living memory. Now let's see what happened. Jan had white, they were coming back from a rest day, and Ding had the momentum because he won the last game, levelled the match. So e4 on the board. This time we see that instead of d4, which Jan played in his last white game. Now e5 from Ding, as expected. We go down these opening moves of the Roy Lopez, no surprises, and after bishop a4, knight f6, well, we don't get any kind of delayed exchange variation, which we saw Nepo use earlier in the match. Instead, he goes castles, we get bishop e7, and now this pawn to d3 move. Now, rook e1 is the absolute main line to defend the e-pawn, but this does a very similar thing, and there's so many move order subtleties here. I don't want to get too hung up on that stuff. Now b5 breaks the pin because there was a threat to eliminate this knight and win a pawn. So this bishop drops back, we see pawn d6, and now different options here for white. You know, there's a lot of moves here with a3 or a4, but we see c3 played in this game, very classic idea, supports d4 later, gives the bishop some room in many lines as well, and now castles was played, pawn h3, such a commonly seen move, and here Ding plays something quite committal. So knight a5 is the main move, followed by c5, these kind of Chigorin ideas of moving this knight to a5. But instead, we see bishop b7. By no means a bad move, of course, but you often see the development of that bishop delayed in case it wants to come to e6 in some lines. But okay, bishop b7, pawn a4 now from Nepo, and now we see this knight a5 idea, and instead of the bishop nudging back to c2, which is perfectly playable, it actually stays on this diagonal, possibly to do with the fact that black's now committed the bishop here, and so it can no longer come here and challenge. Now c5 played, the classic move for black, and bishop g5, and this is really the strategic battle that's now emerging. Can white gain good control of this d5 square? And one step towards that is eliminating this knight, which defends the square. Now you can try and avoid that as black by playing a move like this. You could have a line that goes something along these lines, and okay, you have preserved this knight here, but you've lost some time. White gets a bit of pressure here, and there are these ideas to spin the knight to e3 and then into d5. So like I said, loads of move order subtleties. We'll stick with the game of pawn h6, so Ding allows the knight to be chopped, the bishop recaptures, but he has now picked up the bishop pair, and if the board ever opens up, you know, if in a dream scenario he can achieve d5 with the e5 pawn properly defended, then that could be good for Ding long term. So Jan, he takes on b5, the pawn recaptures, this knight develops, now this knight recycles back into the game, you know, it really moved to free the way for the c pawn, and often it's looking to come to e7 where it can defend this square, and we see bishop d5 fighting against that plan, because Jan here, he'd love to exchange these bishops, thereby increasing his control of this weakened light square. We see the rooks exchange, the queen recaptures, and now queen d7 completes the black development, protects that bishop on b7, and also prepares to fight for the a file with the rook. Rook e1 played, rook a8, and now queen d1, very standard looking move. The queen could bounce out there to reinforce the light squared control, or into f3, g4 if some aggressive ideas ever appear on the cards. And now this is a really key moment, and Anish Giri was quite critical of Ding's play because he wants to improve this bishop. You know, it's kind of stuck behind these pawns, and he goes for this idea of bouncing it around and then going c4. Not a bad idea per se, but possibly g6 and tucking the bishop back here was stronger defense around the king. And after this idea of bishop d8, knight f1, you know, going on this journey, here Giri was really quite critical of the next move, which was knight to e7, allowing the exchange of these bishops. And the actual top computer move here, only depth 21, not really deep, but Stockfish 15 is saying bishop c8. Again, really positional ideas of, not allowing these bishops to be exchanged. Anyway, going to the game, we see knight e7, allowing the chop, queen recaptures, and knight e3. And you can't go d5, you know, you'd love to break because then this pawn drops. So instead, bishop b6, and now a nice move here by Jan, pawn h4, squeezing on that other side of the board. And we'll see the idea, because Ding goes queen c6, preparing c4 to open his bishop, and then h5 comes. And these kind of ideas are now in the air of looking at this light square as well as this light square, and it's now really hard to ever achieve g6 because of this cramping pawn. So Jan a bit better, but c4, Ding looking for some play in the center. d4 in response, great move. Not looking to rip things open too much, trying to keep that bishop out of the game. And because of the pressure on the e5 pawn, we now see Ding capture here. The knight recaptures, hitting the queen. It nudges into c5, and now queen g4. Jan gets aggressive, looking at this king, hoping to land a knight on f5 in a good circumstance. And so Ding now, he goes queen e5, adds some protection around his king, and also opens the eyes of this bishop, and that's why this knight didn't immediately hit f5, because black can actually start liquidating things down here. Now if takes with the pawn, which we see in the game, well, the problem is then the bishop can exchange for knight, and this is good for black. You can't recapture with the rook, or you get mated. The queen is covering this square. You know, you have to give up material. You're getting mated. And if you have to go with the pawn here, well, this is ugly, good for black. So coming back here, that's why no good taking with the pawn. And if you take with the knight, well, now this attack just isn't quite as deadly. The e-file isn't open. The queen's got things covered. And actually, this bishop could get quite powerful. So the knight didn't hop to f5. Instead, it comes back to f3, hits the queen, which moves away, challenges this one, and Jan now interposes the knight and takes it away from the attack of this bishop. And now this is a moment, again, where Giri and Naroditsky, who I was watching today, they were saying that queen f6 may have been the more practical move here. You don't change the pawn structure, you hand the move back to white, and okay, you've still got things covered, you're holding on here. But what we see in the game is captures, pawn recaptures, and then queen f6. Not the computer's favourite way to play, because now we're going to see big pressure after queen e4 hitting the unprotected rook. It saves itself. Well, then we get this sequence of moves. Now you can actually start with g4, but Jan goes rook e2 first. We see bishop c5 and then g4. And this is really the problem for black now, is white's getting this really dangerous looking attack. But the way in which you start to break through is so instructive. So queen d8 was played, anticipating that g5 idea. Possibly you want to go d5 if you ever can achieve it. Or try and go queen d7, rook e8 if you ever could, with a king on f8, challenge the e-file, but it's all quite slow, and Jan is precise here. Queen d5 first, and we'll see one of the big points of that now, because after king f8, king f1, both players doing some king safety stuff, we get rook c8 from Ding. He's just kind of waiting here, not knowing what to move, and we see rook e4 lifting into the game from that square vacated by the white queen. By the way, just going back here, probably queen c8, queen c8, not d7, and then trying to exchange on b7 was best. But the moment you leave the dark squares, well, things like f6 get dangerous. Anyway, rook c8 played, rook e4 in the game, and now rook b8. Ding just waiting to see what Jan's going to do, and bang, he pushes on with g5. And ignore the question mark, it's at a shallow depth. Naroditsky was even saying when it runs deep enough, it starts to love this move. And now Ding doesn't find the best defense. Again, queen d7 is a top idea, looking to come to b7, try and exchange queens. But he takes here, very natural move, and now the follow-up is so hard to find for white. I mean, feel free to pause, have a look for it, or just enjoy the show, as Agadmator would say, right? So you can swing here with the rook to g4. Now, obviously that move makes some sense in itself, attacking this pawn, but after f6, it looks like it just shuts everything down, right? But the killer move here is so beautiful. Now, you might think pawn h6, by the way, to start trying to undermine all the structure, but actually that one can be captured, and now white is apparently worse. It's actually black doing quite well. You know, you don't have a really good follow-up move. So what the move is instead, after pawn f6, is knight to h4. I mean, how beautiful is this attack? And there's this huge threat. So say, for example, where's the line here? Yeah, so say black does nothing and goes b4. What's white's threat here? Well, here with check, the king's only got this one square. You check from e6, only the queen can block, and that's mate. So you can't just let this knight hop into g6. Whoops, sorry. f6, knight h4. Yeah, and if instead of allowing the knight to hop, you capture it, well then this is the trick. You push the pawn onto h6. Now, if that one's captured, well, we check here, the king goes, and again you're getting mated with this kind of sequence, combination of queen and pawn. And coming back here, if instead of capturing, you try and keep lines closed with g5, well then you can capture en passant, and already you can see the huge compensation for a sacrificed knight. This is just completely over. I mean, queen d7 best line, you can check, the king goes, and okay, you've instantly got your material back, and a huge attack, and a pawn. This is like mate in 8. So it's just a deadly attack. f6 impossible because of knight h4. So instead, rook a8 was played, looking for counterplay down here with checks. Now we see the knight capturing on g5. Check. And this is instructive. How many of us would go king g2? And it's not a bad move, but it does then allow the queen to come to a8 and trade the queens off, because this one would be pinned to the king. So that's why Nepo, he comes to e2, we see check, and now knight e4 interposes. There could be now nasty ideas of pawn to f6, and they've reached time control, by the way. Ding was low on time. Here he took some time and plays queen back to e8. King f3 breaks the pin. Ding now goes for this queen to a8 idea, same themes. Nepo does oblige, best move, rook recaptures, but his initiative here is still just overwhelming because the pawn now pushes on to f6 and we see g6 played. If it's captured, well basically after the knight recaptures, it's this pawn is a huge problem. And this is one sample line. You just can't actually stop that pawn without giving up material. You know, f5 to give room for the rook here along the second. You hit this one with tempo, but this is just one sample line and you can't stop this pawn from just running down without giving up your rook. Really, really bad for black, sorry. So instead of capturing, g6 played. This one was captured, pawn takes back, rook takes, rook a2 going for desperate counterplay, and there are many winning moves here. Nepo finds a nice continuation. King g4, the rook captures, and rook h6, forced resignation from Ding. It's now mate in 20, the computer says here. And again, the problem is you just can't stop this pawn without giving up material. I mean, say for example you go rook to e2 attacking this knight, well then simply knight g5 comes, and along with the pawn it's creating this barrier, threatening mate. And if you go king e8 to run away, well, we just start pushing the pawn through. And and then the ending here, you're better to go, rather than rook h8 to queen the pawn, which allows rook here coming behind, this is actually the best way to cover this pawn, prepare this one to push. And there's many similar lines like this basically. You know, if in this position back here, instead of going rook to e2, you try and run with the king immediately, well then again we check, king d7, pawn f7, same kind of problems, the f pawn just wins the game. So Nepo, he takes this one, takes a lead in the match once again. If you enjoyed this one and want to see one of the previous World Championship recaps, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.